We're going to speak to Gideon Falter now, Chief Executive of the Campaign Against Antisemitism. Just before we do that, let me play you this. This was him on BBC over the weekend, calling out the BBC and finding, surprisingly, a bit of pushback from the BBC on anti-Semitism. Here it is.
In your statement today, you singled out the BBC. And in your statement, you said it's the bias and moral collapse of the broadcaster that has essentially turned them into spokespeople for Hamas. You can't seriously think that the BBC is a mouthpiece for Hamas.
Unfortunately, I do, and it's not just me. We do polling of the Jewish community, and over 92% now of British Jews feel that the BBC's coverage of matters of Jewish interest is unfavourable. But on the Hamas point specifically, first of all, the BBC can't bring itself to call Hamas a terrorist organisation. Secondly, we've had the BBC actually sending money.
But we don't label certain groups. We've never done that. I mean, the policy goes back decades. It was the same with the IRA. It was the same with the Taliban. It's not specific to Hamas.
You're happy to call Jihad al-Shami a terrorist, and the terror attack in Manchester yesterday.
It's not part of a group.
I mean, I found that quite extraordinary. I don't know about you guys, but Gideon's here. Gideon, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
I watched that last night. Just as you know, as you do, you come across these things. I was absolutely staggered. I mean, I know Christian Fraser. I mean, he used to work for me many years ago. I was quite surprised by how sort of aggressive he got when you started telling him a few home truths about the way the BBC operates.
Well, I mean, he did ask, didn't he? But the fact of the matter is, everybody, you know, it's become a running joke in the country. People do not think that the BBC is impartial on most things anymore.
No.
On matters of concern to the Jewish community, you rarely get, you know, people who know the Jewish community will know you rarely get Jews agreeing on things to the extent that they now do on the BBC. 92% of British Jews find that the BBC is unfavourable on matters of Jewish interest. And you just have to look at, you know, Gary Lineker's infamous repost depicting Zionists as rats. You've got the BBC actually sent money to the family of the Hamas terrorist and had to admit that they've done that. You've got the chants of death from the stage at Glastonbury after a rant about working for effing Zionists. And the thing is, you know, now that we've actually got dead Jews in pools of blood outside a synagogue, how has that aged? How has that aged? You know, the BBC saying, "Oh, you know, we shouldn't, we didn't realise at the time. It took us 5 hours to realise that the chants for death shouldn't be broadcast into people's homes." And now you've actually got dead Jews on the ground. The BBC should have known this all along. They did know it all along. They just don't care. And I think that's what I have to come to the conclusion with the BBC, because they're a little bit like the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn, completely self-righteous, completely convinced that they cannot possibly be perpetrating the spreading of racism and extremism. And yet, day after day, there is this drumbeat that British Jews feel coming from the BBC and some others in the media, but largely the BBC, where there's this drumbeat constantly, where we're hearing about babies and genocides and famines and apartheid, and it's just not borne out by the evidence. And the BBC is unfortunately complicit in this boiling hot atmosphere of incitement that has led to dead Jews on the streets of Britain.
Yeah. And it's the little things as well. It was like when he said, for example, "Oh yeah, well we called you know, jihadi al-Shami a terrorist because he's not part of a group." Well, first of all, you don't know that he's part of a group because they seem to have arrested some other people in addition to killing him. And so does that mean they don't register groups as terrorist groups, even though they're prescribed by various governments around the world? And I was watching Laura Kunsberg yesterday, and she described the killing by this man Jihad al-Shami. She described him as a British man. And yeah, he had British citizenship, but surely the point of the story is that he came from Syria. And originally that was where his father came from. His father also is somebody who was on record praising the October the 7th attacks.
And that's actually something which really frustrated me about that interview. Just before I came on that BBC interview, they had just been talking about how Faraj al-Shami, the father of Jihad al-Shami, had issued a statement distancing himself from what his son had done and saying that it was horrendous and you know, making out that he was, you know, pretty much a good guy.
Right.
This was hours and hours after all of the other outlets had started saying, actually, Faraj al-Shami had praised the October 7th medieval murder, rape, torture, and brutality, and kidnappings. And, you know, you just look at the BBC and think, this is an organization which touts things like BBC Verify. The BBC doesn't really seem to verify very much at all when it comes to its coverage on Israel, and instead it just repeats lies. I remember, you know, not so long ago, we had someone on the BBC saying that unless Israel did this and this, 14,000 babies would die in 48 hours. And when that was completely debunked, the BBC, you know, they don't challenge it at the time. They don't apologize for it afterwards. They just plow on and bring on the next spokesperson for Hamas.
Well, one of the worst things I witnessed, and I think it was probably in the first year before even the first anniversary of 2007, the October 7th rather, was Jeremy Bowen, you know, who used to be, you know, a highly respected, you know, senior foreign correspondent for the BBC, who now appears to have been completely captured. I saw him interviewing a Hamas leader, and at the end of the interview, he gets up and gives the guy a hug, right? And then he also reported, you might remember, the so-called rocket from an Israeli shell which hit a hospital, killing 500 people. Turned out not only was there not a rocket fired, but it was a rocket that came from a jihadi group which misfired, and it didn't land in the hospital, it didn't kill 500 people, it landed in the car park. He then said in an interview to one of the, I think it was Hard Talk, he said, yeah, I got that wrong. And they said, do you regret that? He said, no. I don't regret it because, you know, the whole point about it is that Israel is doing terrible things in Gaza. And you go, well, so you're happy to get it wrong. You're not sorry you got it wrong. And the context of why you're not sorry is because Israel's doing terrible things. It's not really journalism, is it?
No, it's activism. And you just have to look, not even... you know, a lot of this stuff predates the October 7th attack. If you look at the BBC's coverage, there was an attack on Oxford Street in London. There were some Jewish teenagers who were there for Hanukkah, and they were minding their own business when suddenly they got attacked by a mob of young men. And they'd arrived on a bus, and they managed to run back onto their bus and drive away. And this was all captured on video and circulated on social media. And the BBC said that they uniquely could hear the Jewish teenagers shouting anti-Muslim slurs. Literally everybody listened to this footage. We had sound experts deconstruct the footage in order to be able to figure out exactly what was said by whom. There was no anti-Muslim slur, and eventually the BBC had to admit they'd made it up. They said that they'd misheard it. It was you know, but along the way, the BBC had been completely belligerent. At first, they said that anti-Muslim slurs, plural, could be clearly heard. Then they said, no, actually, it was just one anti-Muslim slur. Then they said, actually, it couldn't be clearly heard. It went through multiple levels of complaint. Eventually, Ofcom had to weigh in as well, which is quite rare. The BBC is unique amongst broadcasters in that it's allowed to self-regulate. And it's just absolutely appalling behaviour that once we get past October 7th, just ramps up. And the BBC, you know, as I said, unfortunately has become an institution of complete moral collapse, which has become essentially a mouthpiece for Hamas propaganda, which is completely unapologetic, unable to reform itself. And the BBC now has to be investigated externally. There has to be an external inquiry into the BBC. And until that has concluded and the BBC's institutional anti-Semitism problem is dealt with, I think the BBC should no longer be the recipient of taxpayers' money.
And I think an awful lot of people listening to this show and watching this show would absolutely agree. Gideon, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Gideon Falter, Chief Executive of the Campaign Against Antisemitism. Tomorrow, of course, the second anniversary of October the 7th, 2023.